Hello and welcome. I'd like to introduce you to a way of seeing the world that is a synthesis of everything that I've learned. I'm introducing this to anyone who I meet who's interested in this kind of thing. The first piece I'll introduce you to is what I call the moral matrix. It shows that rather than mere good or bad, morality is on a spectrum from worse to better, and that we can think of it most easily in terms of whether we are being a winner, a loser, an angel, or an asshole. And here in this corner, we have the loser asshole who suffers while causing suffering for others. Here we have the angel loser who suffers while causing benefit to others. Here we have the winner asshole who benefits while causing suffering to others. And here we have the angel winner who benefits while causing benefit to others. So, seen another way, as mapped out to the socio emotional lens, this lowest form or state of being is the phi state. Here we have the beta state. Here we have the alpha state. And here we have the omega state. There's a state in the middle that we haven't addressed yet called the sigma, which stands outside the hierarchy, which we'll address soon. So, what's important to note when we think about the social statuses that we just assigned, the phi, beta, alpha, sigma, and omega, is that they are accompanied by neurohormonal states that are nicely described in what's called the polyvagal lens. Many people are familiar with fight and flight as sympathetic activation of the nervous system. These are mobilizing tendencies. Very few people are familiar with the parasympathetic, or at least the extent of its function. The polyvagal points to how the vagal nerve, also known as the vagus nerve, the vagus nerve or vagal nerve, which is cranial nerve number 10, has two ends, and these are represented here by the phi and the omega. And now we see that we have two axes that start to form. We have the sympathetic axis here, where the alpha is in fight and the beta is in flight. And we also have the parasympathetic axis here, where the phi is in freeze and the omega is in fun, family, free, etc. So here we have all the F's. It's important to note that the immobilization in what's called dorsovagal is different from the immobilization we call ventrovagal. So the phi is immobilized like the omega is, but the phi is immobilized from a place of very low faith or energy or hope or confidence, whereas the omega is in the highest state of faith, energy, hope, confidence, etc. So, what's interesting to note is that we just talked about moral states, emotional states, social states, using the same matrix, the winner, loser, angel, asshole matrix. And while good, considerate, sympathetic, compassionate, empathic people don't like to label people as winners and losers, angels and assholes, I think that's well intended but misguided. And that in fact, we do harm to a person when we fail or resist to point out that when they are suffering and they're causing suffering to other people, they are actually in the arguably lowest moral status possible. As caretakers, as healers, as lovers, as humanitarians, we feel bad, appropriately so, for the person who is both suffering and causing suffering to others. But that bad feeling, these are tears, but that bad feeling, logic says, should not get in the way of us looking at the facts. Now, I want to introduce you to something that shows how logic itself is insufficient for navigation through reality. It's this acronym PELT, and I invite you to wear this PELT. Pathos, ethos, logos, and telos. Pathos is like passion, emotion, but also sickness, obsession, addiction. So we don't want it running the show alone. Ethos, ethics, culture, etc. Logos, logic, rationality, etc. Telos, purpose, direction, vision, what we call the point. So what's the point of this whole conversation? Well, it's to show that these states are fluid. These are fluid states. And that saves us, in part, from our hesitation of describing the loser, asshole, as such, putting those offensive and oppressive, and discouraging labels on a person. Now, the fact that we can move from phi to beta to alpha to sigma to omega is important. And I consider this a kind of human alchemy, where we go from a heart of glass that shatters easily, right? So this is a person who suffers and causes other suffering because the heart of glass shatters easily. And then when someone wants to step on it, anyone who comes around the heart of glass has to walk on eggshells or shards of broken glass to be careful to not hurt themselves and not hurt the heart of glass that is very sensitive. Next up from freeze, where you're cuddled up into a ball and want to die in the fetal position, that's a fetal position, we have flight. Whereas the person in freeze was so hopeless they don't even think they can escape the threat, at least flight, fear, the heart of paper is a little bit stronger. You can step on it, but you can also burn it up. And paper comes to clean up the shards of glass, and you can bundle it up into a package. This is a crumpled ball of paper full of glass. And that's a level up. So from sad, it's actually a level up to now be scared. You've gone from freeze to flight. The next level up, you've gone from phi to beta. The next level up is angry. Just as a exercise, consider whether a population of people would ever elect a sad person to be their leader. I think not. A scared person to be their leader? I think not. How about an angry person? Yes. A population might pick an angry person. They might pick an alpha. Now, if they have a more evolved level of consciousness, they may pick a sigma or an omega. But for now, we see that we may have crossed a threshold. We have crossed a threshold when we go from the heart of paper to the heart of fire, the warrior. Although still volatile, this person is stronger, more directed, and hopeful than the prior two ways of being. So this is the heart fire. These are flames. And the important thing is that while we have taken a step up when we went from sad to scared to angry, all three of these still have, remember, some negativity. In the freeze heart of glass, the negativity is both internal and external. In the martyr beta, the negativity is internal, but the positivity is external. That is inverted in the heart of fire, where the positivity is internal and the negativity or the toxicity is externalized. And so we go from those three positions, which are all high pressure, volatile, dependent, and conditional, which we'll describe in just a second, to a 0 point of neutrality, of peace, of less pressure. Now, I mentioned that these three, the glass, the paper, and the fire, are all volatile, they're all sensitive. I called them conditional. One way to think of this is they all say, I'll be okay if or when. So they're conditional. I'll stop being sad when. I'll stop being scared if. I'll stop being angry when. So they're all conditional. And that's tied to that negativity, right? This negativity, the sadness, the scaredness, the angriness, will give way to peace if and when, right? So this 0 state is also a state of peace. But when you find your own peace, perhaps you call it God's peace, perhaps you call it emptiness, perhaps you call it the unconditional, and you can integrate and transcend these parts, the sad part, the scared part, and the angry part, then you have what's called a heart of stone. Heart of stone or a heart of ice. Now, it's not the end, because what we're going for the star, is a heart of gold. And this is anthropological alchemy. Okay, anthropological alchemy. The true alchemy is the alchemy of the human heart. But the human is not just the heart, the human is also the mind, but that's not it. The human is physical, emotional, mental, financial, social, and moral. And what we just described in the previous slides is the movement from being dependent to being independent to being dependable in the emotional sense. Being angry, sad, or scared are all versions of being emotionally dependent. Becoming at peace with whatever happens is a version of being emotionally independent, and being able to bring peace to others is emotional dependability. So these are sick, this is healed, and this is a healer. Okay? Notice, though, that this same dynamic of going from dependent to independent to dependable applies to all six: the physical, emotional, mental, financial, social, and moral. If you're giving someone moral support, that means that you have gone from being morally dependent to morally independent to finally morally dependable. The last thing I'll say about this, and then I'll pause for feedback, is that we're talking about going from having an external locus of control to having external locus of control to having internal locus of control, or God. Maybe God is your locus of control rather than the mundane or the manifest realm. And finally, as you grow out of that, you become a valid or legitimate external locus of control for others. Another way of thinking of this is going from being a student to a graduate to a teacher. What are we teaching? We're teaching about self and life. This is also known as the game of all lives goal. What's the game of all lives? To evolve, to mature, to go from being dependent to independent to dependable. This is also known as the human race. What are we all racing towards? We're racing towards evolution, maturation, mastery. And just a little tidbit for everyone to go home and consider is that the way we do this is we go from being having unconscious incompetence to having conscious incompetence, also known, for instance, as humility, to conscious competence, which is effort or intentional fake it, make it. And finally, unconscious competence. Okay, hope you've enjoyed.